Hello and welcome back everybody to another JavaScript tutorial. In this video, we are going to be covering the Office API and working with tables. So we're going to see how to work with a table object inside of the Office API, also called list objects if you're coming from a VBA background. Now, just as an FYI, there's different things that we kind of have to recognize about the API. It's not fully developed, so that we might be losing some functionality at this point. So there's certain things that we were able to do with list objects inside of VBA that we're just simply not going to be able to do inside of the JavaScript API. But again, as time goes on, the functionality will be added, and there will probably in most cases have new functionality added. But if you can't do everything that you currently can do inside of VBA, just stick around a little bit, and before you know it, that functionality will come back. So just an FYI. Okay, and as you can already tell, I pretty much structured my code so that way we're going to be going through just different things. So like creating a table, adding data, filtering, clearing a filter, table selection, and then taking a JSON data structure and putting it into a Excel data table. So this is just to save time. That way I don't have to kind of keep recreating the same functions and stuff like that. And then also I have the HTML set up where that's just creating all the buttons. And that's pretty obvious. Once you go over here, you'll see everything that we'll be doing with this particular video. Okay, so with that being said though, I am going to get started. So let's start with probably the most basic thing that we can do is creating a table. We need to be able to create a table in order to actually do some stuff with it. Now, for the most part, this is pretty straightforward. The only thing that's going to be a little bit different is how we actually input the data. So the first thing that we need to do is define where the sheet is that's going to be containing this particular table. So define the sheet where the table will live. And this is going to be, consistent all throughout the entire video. So we're just going to have to define the sheet, and then we talk about the particular table we want to work with. And so what we'll do is we'll create a new variable called sheet that will equal the context, the runtime environment. We'll go into the workbook property, referring to this one, into worksheets, and then we're going to call the get item method and then pass through the name of the table. In this case, it's called my table. And so right here, you can tell that the worksheet is named my table. So this will select the sheet my table. Now, before we actually, before we actually input the data into it, we're going to actually create the table itself, and we're going to name it, and then we're going to put the headers in there, and then we're going to put the actual values in there as well. So it's kind of two separate components. There's actually inputting the headers and then inputting the actual data itself. So here, let's add the table. And so we'll again also define a variable to store it, and we'll give it something, pretty generic like expense table. And then we'll go to sheet, we'll go to the tables collection, and then we'll call the add method. We need to define the range where we're going to be housing this table. And right now, I'm just going to say it's going to be A1 to D1. Now, it will actually be larger than this, but for right now, we can actually just define this table to take up the range that's actually smaller than the total data value. You'll see kind of why in a second. Okay, so first thing we did is we added a table, we defined the range of that table, and then the second parameter is, does that table have headers? In this case, it will have headers, and I want to make sure that I let JavaScript know that, so I set that parameter equal to true. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's give our table a name. And this is pretty straightforward. You're just going to call the actual table object, and then there is a name property that you can set. And so we'll say expense table, just like that. Okay, and then from here, let's set the header values. Because right now, there's nothing actually in there. And so we want to actually put the headers in there. So we're going to call our expense table, and then we're going to say get header row range, brackets, and then it's going to be dot, and then we're going to set the values property. And then this one is going to be basically an array of values. And so we'll give it one called product. The next one will be color. The next one will be amount. And the final one will be price. And if I do this, let's see what we get when we run this. Okay, so right now we have a table. There's no data in it, but it does have our headers. So we're kind of, partially there. Now, if I run it again, it will actually give me an error because I'm trying to create a table over another table, which that just doesn't work. So now that we've set the headers, now we need to actually put in the values for it. Now, I had that code down below, so I'm just going to take that because it's going to save me a ton of time typing, and I don't want you guys to have to sit around watching me type a bunch of values. Hopefully, you'll be able to look at this and kind of understand what exactly I'm doing. But Control KU, tab in, and then all we do is we call our table object, we call the rows collection, and then we specify the add method. And the first parameter is, do you want to add the rows to the end of the table, or are you specifying a specific index? We'll see specifying a specific index in the next example. But right now, I'm okay with just putting all these row values down at the bottom of the table. And naturally, if you're looking at this, it's just containing the information that we've defined in our header. So it's a product, a color of that product, a quantity, and then a price. And so this is just simply passing through each one of these and adding it to that table. So now I should see something like that, which looks good. So that's our table. We've now created it. And so now that we've created our table, maybe we want to add additional data somewhere, during our script or something like that. So maybe we're going to have a user form where the user can, add some information, and we want it to automatically populate to this particular table. Well, how would that look? For the most part, it's exactly the same. Pretty much all we're really doing is we're just kind of leveraging this again. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to copy one line of these code, and I'm just going to change some stuff. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do this, and where is it? Oh, okay, yeah. And so I'm going to say get worksheets. Okay, so that's our sheet. And then we need to grab the table. So now that we have the sheet, we need to grab the table in order to add the new row values. And so from here, what we're going to be doing is grabbing that particular table. So grab the table, and again, we're going to create the same variable pretty much again. So we'll say let expenses table equal, and we'll go to the sheet. We'll go to the tables collection, but now we're going to call the get item method because the table already exists and we don't want to create a new one. So we're just going to take the existing one that we already have. So in that example, now what we're doing is we're going to leverage this thing right here. So we're going to take the table name and actually call it. And so that's why we named it up there. So now we can use the name of the table in order to select it. So again, we're not adding a new table, we're simply selecting an existing one. And when we're selecting an existing one, we're going to use the get item method where we pass through either the name or the index of the table in the collection. But in this case, I use the name because that tends to be a little bit better. Okay, so let's define some new data. So we're going to define some new data to add to the table. I already have that, of course, down below. And so I'm going to take that and just put it right up here. And we're going to say let new data equal. And it's just simply an array of additional data. And you can tell because these ones are now having the color purple in it. Now from here, again, it's going to be relatively straightforward what we're doing, but we're just going to add the data to the table. But in this example, I want to actually add it to a specific index. And so from here, what I'm going to do, I want to add it to row 7, for example. So I want to basically push these two down and add these two new ones right where those ones were. So in this example, it's going to change a little bit different. So add the data to row 7. And so we're going to say expenses table. We're going to say rows. We're going to go to the add method. We're going to specify the index, which is 6, and then we're going to say add in the new data. Remember, we are zero based. We are zero based. We do not start at 1. We start at 0. So if I do this, oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong one. Okay, so now it added these two new rows to our particular table. So pretty cool stuff, I think. You can see right there. So it just took these ones and it added it to the table. So that was adding a row. What if we want to add a column to our table? And more importantly, maybe we want to have it where this column has a formula in it. How would that look? Well, for the most part, it's pretty much identical to just adding rows, but instead of using the rows collection, we're going to specify the columns collection. And then more importantly, our array is going to be structured a little bit differently. So we're going to add a new column. And here, what we're going to do is, again, call the expenses table. We're going to call the columns collection. And then we're going to call the add method. In this example, I'm okay with it being at the end. So I'm just going to specify the null one. And then, as you guessed it, I have some data. And actually, it looks like I already put it in there. So I'm just going to copy over that so that way I don't have to change any of that. And I'll show you kind of what it's going to look like. And we're going to tab in, tab in. Okay, so expenses table, columns, add it to the last column, and then just add all these guys right here. Now, technically, as you can tell, it's not going to work right because there's not enough rows to do that. Because if I run this again, it's going to add 2 more rows, and then it's going to try to add that column, which it's just not going to work. So I'm going to delete these guys, and then we'll add it again, and then we'll add the new column. So that's the thing you've got to be careful with sometimes, is making sure that when you're doing it manually like this, that it actually is, it's going to be the right amount and stuff like that. So just be a little bit careful when you're adding a new column. Again, we'll do more examples and I'll kind of find better ways maybe to do this, but this was kind of the first example I was given on that particular topic. So we're going to have to play around and see how we can do it to make it be a little bit more, what would be the word, robust. Okay, so let's do this. Let's add it and see what we get. Okay, so you can tell here it added the rows and then it added the new column, which is simply a formula. And it does change it sometimes. It's weird because for whatever reason, if I put in the @ sign here, it seemed to kind of throw it off. But then when I put it here, it seemed like it was adjusting it automatically. So for the most part, it seems to work fine. But then if you go in here again, it will kind of prompt you to change the styling of the formula, and then it automatically adjusts it. So I'm not really sure kind of why that is, because on the documentation, they just put it in like this. They don't put any symbols. But for this one, for whatever reason, it will prompt you to change kind of the formatting. It still works, but it's just one of those things where that message will pop up. So I'm still trying to understand why that's popping up. And once I kind of figure it out, I'll kind of pass that along. Okay, so we've added data to our table. Something else we might want to do is filter our table. So we might want to filter it where we only show, the red ones, for example, something like that. How would that look inside the JavaScript API? Well, again, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to copy these guys right here again, just so that way we can save some time and not, kind of explain stuff we already know. Okay, so we have our table. What do we do from here? Well, we're going to define a filter, and there's different types of filters inside of a table object, or it's not really there's different types of filters, but you can set different filtering criteria. Now, I'm not going to run through all of them. I'm just going to run through 2, but probably in the second video, I'll go through some more examples about, the different types of filters. This is kind of just to get us started and say, okay, if I want to set a filter, how would it look, and kind of what are the steps I need to do. So let's define a filter. So define a filter for the color column. And from here, what we're going to do is we're going to say let, and we'll give it, again, name color filter equal expenses table, columns, we'll go to the columns, we'll get the item that we want to filter. In this case, I want to filter the color column, and then I'm going to call the filter property. So this might be a little bit different. This might be different for people. You call your table, you specify your columns collection, you get the column you want to filter, and then you call the filter property that belongs to that particular column. From here, then you call that filter and you call the apply method. And from here, there's going to be a couple parameters that you have to pass through. The first one is filter on, and then, oh wait, I think I didn't put my brackets, sorry. It's filter on, and then it's going to be Excel filter on, and in this case, I want to filter on the values. So if it's a certain value, I only want to show that particular value. And so what we'll do here is we'll put a comma, and then we have to put the criterion, or sorry, not the criterion, the values. And so here, what values do you want to filter on? In this case, I want to filter on red. So here, what we're doing is we're creating that filter for the color column. We're going to apply a filter where it's going to filter on the values, and the values we want to filter on is red. So if I filter it, I now only see red. Now that was just using one value. Maybe I want to say, hey, I want red and purple, for example. Well, then here, it will just add that second value, and it's really just a list in a sense. So you're just defining a list. So that's setting one filter. You can have multiple filters applied to a single table. It would just represent a different column. So maybe I want to filter on the colors, and I also want to filter on the price. So define a filter for the, I don't know, price column. We'll do that. And so we'll say let price filter, I'm going to scroll down a little bit, equal the expenses table. We'll go to the columns collection. We'll call the get item method. And then we're going to say grab the price column. And then we're going to call the filter property that belongs to that column. And again, it's the same for the most part. It's going to look a little bit different because now we're filtering on a different type of criteria in a sense. And so we're going to say, I only want to show the top two items. So the number 2 item, for example. So the second highest value. Well, here we're going to say price filter dot apply. We'll put our squirrely brackets. We'll do filter on. Then we'll do Excel filter on. And then we'll do top items. We'll put a comma. And then we'll say criteria 1. And here you can pass through a string. And what we'll say is I want the second highest value, So it should be, I think, the 121.5. If I do that, perfect. Okay. But then you also have to keep in mind it kind of removed the other ones because this one's so restrictive that it only returns one value. Technically, there's another way to write this. And so, oh, sorry, my bad. I think I was doing the wrong column. I misspoke really quickly. Sorry, I was doing it on the price. I don't know why I did total revenue, but I was talking the price column. So 13,500 is the second highest price in this column. And so we filtered on the 13,500. Sorry, I misspoke. It was not the total revenue one, and I should have recognized that when I selected the price column. But yeah, that's how you would do that particular filter. But with this one, we can actually write it a little bit differently. And I think this is just more intuitive. I don't know why. For me, I get this one. So I just call the apply top items filter, and you just do that. So literally we did it in less lines of code, and I think there's less of a chance where there's a typo with this one. So me personally, I kind of like this one, but it's up to you how you want to do it. There's really not a wrong way, but you can tell it gets the same exact result that you were kind of expecting up above. Okay, so if we can apply filters, naturally the question is, well, can we remove filters? Of course we can remove filters. And you'll be surprised, it's not that hard to remove filters. It's actually pretty straightforward. Hold on, I gotta move my notes really quick. So what we'll do is we'll just call this, and I'll put it down here. I don't know why I had that one there, but apparently I did. All you do is if you want to clear the filter, you just call the expenses table, and then there's a clear filters method. And so to demonstrate that, let's put this to blue, okay? And so then if I do clear filter, lo and behold, it clears the filter. So that's probably the simplest example out of all of these ones, but hopefully now you know how to work with filters. What about selecting different parts of our table? How do we do that? So maybe I want to select the data body range, I want to select the headers range, particular column, a particular row. How would that look? Well, luckily for us, it's not too complicated. So we're just gonna copy this, and we're gonna put it down here. Yeah, table selection. Okay, so let's grab the header range. Grab the header range. So we're gonna call the expenses table, and there's something called the get header range, header row range, my bad. You wanna put your brackets, and then you wanna call the select method. It's very important you put your brackets because this is actually returning that range object, at which point you can then call a select method on a range object. And so, as you can tell, it selected the header range, just like that. Okay, so that's the header range. What's the next one we can do? We can get the data body range, which is basically this. And so here, grab the data body range, and it would be, again, the expenses table, get the data body range, put our brackets to return that range object, and then we want to do the select method. And so again, we'll call the grab parts, selected the data body range. What about the other ones? Well, we can get the entire table itself. So get the entire table. And then from here, it would be the expenses table. We'll do the get range. And then here, we would put dot select, and we put our comma. And then from here, we should be able to grab the parts, and it grabs the entire table, Okay, let's grab a specific column. How would that look? Well, let's grab a specific column. And so we'll go to our expenses tables. We'll go to the columns collection. We'll call the get item method. Here, I want to select the color column. And then I want to call the get range method. And then we call the select method. Kind of long, but we have to grab the range first, or we have to define the range before we select it. So that's the only kind of confusing part. But here, now you can select a specific column. What about a specific row? Well, the logic's pretty much the same. Grab a specific row, but you gotta keep in mind what's going on. So we'll define the expenses table. We'll do the rows collection. There's a get item at method. We define the index. We call the get range method, and then we call the select method. Keep in mind, this does not include the header. So the header is not a row. So this will return the fourth column because it does not include the header and it starts at 0. 0, 1, 2. I know, more ways to get confused, right? But that's kind of the logic behind it. This is its own row, and this has its own way of selecting it, so it's not considered part of the rows collection. It's its header. It's the header in a sense. From here, our last example, I do want to tell you, it's not going to work in this example, but if you want, you can do expenses table, and there's one final one, get total row range. Keep in mind, you actually have to have a total row in order to select it. I don't currently have it, so what do you think is going to happen? you guessed it, it's going to give us a wonderful error saying, hey, you're trying to select something that doesn't exist. So you have to make sure that if you're calling certain methods that they do truly exist. Otherwise, you're going to get an error back. So just keep that in mind when you're working with these tables and selecting it, that either A, the number of rows exists that you're trying to select, or the column, or just the actual component of that table, whether it's the data body range or the header row or a total row range. You just got to keep that in mind. The final example that we're going to talk about is taking JSON data and actually converting it to a table object. This is going to be really helpful when it comes to actually working with our APIs and having that data just kind of nicely flow into our Excel workbook. So there was an example on the Microsoft documentation website, so I wanted to take that and run through that example just because I think it kind of does exactly what we need. Really, the only thing we're going to do here is we're just going to change a couple things. Oh, wait, wrong one. I'm going to copy that. And we're going to go to our JSON to table function. And then what we'll do, that's fine. We'll call this now, what is it? What do we want to call it? JSON table. I want this to be from A20 to D20. So it's going to be right here. And then we're going to give it a new name. And we'll call it, what do we call it? JSON table. Okay, so that's just going to add that new table. We've seen that. That shouldn't look anything really familiar or unfamiliar. Do I have the headers? I don't. Oh, damn. Oh, we're going to add the headers. Add the headers. We're going to call the JSON table. Get header row range. We'll do that. And then we'll call the values property. And then it's going to be the date. We're going to call that merchant. And then we're going to call that category. And then finally, we're going to give that one amount. So that will create the headers for us. I have some transactions that are already defined for us. And as you can tell, this is in JSON format. So this is how we normally get data back when we're requesting from an API. So this shouldn't look too unfamiliar to us. And then from here, this is where things take just a tiny turn. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop through each item in our JSON object, and we basically want to parse it and convert it into a list and then store that list basically in this master list. So that way we can kind of have it in a structure that looks like this. We want it in an array type structure. Right now it's in a JSON structure. That doesn't really work for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert our JSON object to an array. And so here we'll give it something, we'll just call it new data. We'll call our transactions variable, and then there's something called the map method. And then this takes a couple parameters. And so here we're going to pass through an item. And so what it's basically doing is it's going to loop through this entire transaction. So each one of these is considered an item. And then from here, we want to specify what we're going to do with each one of those items. Well, we're just going to parse it basically. And so we'll want to parse it and store it into a particular array. And so we'll say item. We'll parse the date first. Item. We'll take the merchant. Item. We'll get the category. And then item. We'll get the amount. Hold on. Let me put this below. I just want to make sure everyone can see it. Okay. So we call our JSON, basically our JSON data. We call the map method. This either can take a function or, you can do different things. There's one in it in Python as well. Basically, you define a function that you want to apply to each item in kind of like your object. And in this case, all I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, for each item, simply parse it and store it in an array where the first element is the date, the second one is merchant, third is category, and fourth is amount. And once you've done that, finally take this kind of new data array and simply add it to the table. And so add the array to the table. And so we'll call our JSON table, we'll call the rows property, and then the add method, we're okay with it being the last row because there's no rows. Well, I mean, there's a header, but that doesn't count. And then we're just going to simply pass through that. And so really, from here, it now has added that JSON data to a table. So really cool. This is going to be super helpful when we start working with APIs. But again, hopefully when you're looking at this, nothing was super confusing. You simply have some JSON data. You're going to loop through each item in this JSON data. You're going to parse it for the relevant information, and you're going to store it in an array. And then you're going to take that array and simply add it to the table. You're going to add it to the table. That's it. So with that being said, though, that does conclude this video. If you have any questions about how to work with tables, please put them down in the comments below. There will probably be another video working with a table object because there are some more stuff we can do with it. And I do want to go over more of the formula stuff and I think applying certain filters and things along that nature. So, please put them down if you kind of have ideas that you might want to do in the second video. Also, if you could, please make sure to like the video. We always appreciate the support. And if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you get regular updates as we release new videos. So thanks again for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next video.